The sedated bride. The awakening and downfall of a tycoon. The whispers of a scandal envelop an opulent mansion. A bride teeters on the brink of despair and betrayal. The press clamors for a glimpse of the elusive groom, a self-made millionaire with secrets buried deep. Across the city, a mysterious woman awakens from a nightmare, pregnant and abandoned, determined to reclaim her rightful place. Rumors spread like wildfire that she was lost in a coma, yet here she is, entering a whirlwind of lies and broken vows. Only one thing is certain: the truth will emerge, and when it does, no one's life will ever be the same. Part 1. The Game of Illusions and the Seed of Vengeance. Elias Sterling, the reclusive millionaire, built his empire on brilliant investments and a relentless determination to succeed. He was not born wealthy. It was said he clawed his way out of poverty in a small Texas town through sheer cunning and cold ambition. Those who knew him often sensed a current of jealous secrecy, as if his smooth smiles concealed a labyrinth of unconfessable truths. With every successful deal, his public acclaim soared, yet within the walls of his luxurious Dallas mansion, Elias lived a life shrouded in dark shadows. Madeleine Delacroix was the woman everyone believed lay unconscious in a private medical facility, lost to the world for reasons never fully explained. She had been introduced to Elias's circle as his wife, a radiant presence at his side during high society galas. Then, without warning, she vanished. Gossip spread that she had fallen gravely ill, and Elias, grief-stricken, had placed her under the best medical care money could buy. Few questioned his motives, though some whispered that something more sinister lurked beneath the surface. Across town, however, Madeleine's family knew a different story. Her mother, Beatrice Delacroix, was never convinced that her daughter's condition was as described. Phone calls to the clinic were inconclusive. Staff would not disclose details, citing privacy regulations. Elias rarely visited, and every attempt by the Delacroix family to see Madeleine was met with excuses or outright denial of entry. Fearing legal retaliation, they had little choice but to wait, praying their beloved Madeleine was truly receiving the care she needed and would one day awaken. Meanwhile, Elias continued to play the role of the grieving husband in public, yet he appeared strangely unfettered by pain. He traveled widely, seeking new acquisitions. He was seen at exclusive parties with a radiant companion named Sienna Bellwether, a rising model from Dallas. Stories circulated that the two were becoming more than just business acquaintances. Rumors mounted when they were photographed on a yacht in the Caribbean, looking intimately comfortable. But whenever questioned about his wife, Elias would clench his jaw and offer a rehearsed line. "She is resting, undergoing specialized treatment." Behind closed doors, Elias was orchestrating a grand deception. He needed Madeleine out of the way, or so he believed, because his entire fortune hung on a carefully woven tapestry of illusions. The truth was, his marriage to Madeleine came with ironclad prenuptial clauses, some of which he had never intended to honor. Early on, he discovered Madeleine's father had established a trust for her, one that would revert fully to her control if certain conditions were met. Elias's own empire was shaky on its precarious foundation, and Madeleine's trust was the key to keeping it all together. Elias convinced doctors on his payroll to declare Madeleine comatose, falsifying medical documents to support the narrative. He arranged her confinement in a secluded facility owned by a shell company. There, she was maintained in a heavily sedated state, preventing her from expressing her plight. Yet, even under sedation, her health remained stable. He ensured her mother's calls never reached the chief physician, feeding only the updates he wanted them to hear. His core goal was to buy time until he could maneuver access to Madeline's wealth without the world suspecting foul play. Within the silence of her forced sleep, Madeline's mind occasionally surfaced like a diver struggling for air. Unbeknownst to Elias, the medical staff had not perfectly complied with his sedation orders. Faint memories clung to her, fueling a latent resolve to fight back. It was only a matter of time. As Madeline drifted between consciousness and sedation, fate intervened in the form of Dr. Miranda Hayes, a neurologist recently arrived from a prestigious research fellowship. Driven by compassion and curiosity, Dr. Hayes took an interest in Madeline's case. She found the patient's records incomplete, rife with inconsistencies that raised red flags. Protocol demanded she consult with senior staff, but each time she tried, she was blocked. Undeterred, she resolved to discover the truth behind Madeline's baffling condition. Simultaneously, in a quiet corridor of Sterling Corp, Elias's personal assistant, Javier Morales, had begun to piece together his own puzzle. As the right-hand man to a powerful tycoon, Javier witnessed transactions hinting at questionable dealings. He noted discrepancies in financial records, secret wire transfers to a private clinic, late-night phone calls to close-lipped executives. Javier's intuition warned him that something was amiss, and his conscience wouldn't allow him to ignore the mounting evidence, despite his loyalty to the man who had given him a career. Javier's suspicions deepened when Elias announced plans for a lavish event, rumored to be a discreet engagement party with Sienna Bellwether. Everyone knew about Madeline's supposed coma, yet Elias acted as if his wife never existed. The guest list included celebrities, politicians, and prospective investors, all who mattered in the world of high finance. Javier was tasked with finalizing the arrangements, ensuring no unpleasant surprises marred the night. He found himself questioning how Elias planned to reconcile his comatose wife with a forthcoming celebration of new love. Behind the scenes, Dr. Hayes, refusing to remain complicit, delved deeper into Madeline's file. She discovered suspiciously high, but not always fulfilled, sedation orders by the nursing staff. One nurse unofficially confided that she had only administered half the dosage after Madeline's vitals began showing signs of undue stress. Another nurse mentioned that Madeline would occasionally flutter her eyes open, murmur a few words, and then lapse back into a stupor. Questions brewed in Dr. Hayes's mind. Who had authorized these extreme measures, and why did so many staff members remain silent? Elsewhere, Madeline's father, Richard Delacroix, had hired a private investigator named Franklin "Frank" Gates. A severe but resourceful man, Frank had a reputation for unearthing deeply buried secrets. Beatrice Delacroix was certain Elias had fabricated her daughter's condition, and Frank was the only man she trusted to uncover the truth. With his discreet inquiries, he unearthed clues pointing to illegal sedation and possible fraud. Yet every lead seemed to vanish into a labyrinth of corporate shell companies and non-disclosure agreements. The deeper Frank dug, the clearer it became that Elias Sterling was no ordinary adversary. As Dr. Hayes kept Madeline's condition under close observation, she noticed subtle changes. Madeline's eyes fluttered more frequently, and once she even gripped the doctor's hand. Determined to preserve these small advances, Dr. Hayes quietly reduced the sedation further. Little did she know her covert interventions would spark a chain of events, leading to a long-awaited awakening, one that would send shockwaves through Elias's carefully constructed empire. In the ensuing weeks, Madeline drifted in and out of a nebulous awareness. Fragmented memories surfaced. The day she met Elias at a charity gala in San Antonio. Their whirlwind romance. Her father's warnings about the prenuptial agreement. She recalled her wedding day, a day overshadowed by a sense of unease in her stomach. Scenes of heated arguments at the mansion flickered, culminating in a final confrontation before everything went black. Each memory ignited a spark of determination within her, fueling a silent vow to break free. Meanwhile, Dr. Hayes seized every opportunity to examine Madeline's responses to the reduced sedation. Heart rate, pupil dilation, neurological reflexes, all indicated Madeline's mind was bravely fighting to reassert control over her body. Though official directives required her to maintain a high sedation regimen, Dr. Hayes quietly documented her findings in a separate notebook, keeping them hidden from administrative staff. If anyone discovered her covert investigation, her career and possibly her safety could be compromised. But moral integrity outweighed any fear she harbored. In a towering boardroom overlooking the Dallas skyline, Elias was finalizing preparations for a high-stakes merger. His soon-to-be fiancée, Sienna Bellwether, entered the room, her perfect model presence demanding attention. She cuddled up to Elias, whispering sweet words of affection. Observers saw a powerful duo, unstoppable in business and glamour. Only Javier Morales glimpsed the occasional cracks, Elias's sleepless nights, the perpetual tension in his voice when discussing his incapacitated wife. Sienna herself seemed oblivious, or simply uninterested in what truly happened to Madeline, as long as she maintained Elias's favor. As the engagement party date drew closer, invitations were sent to a select circle. The event was touted as an extravagant celebration at a private estate outside the city. Security would be tight, and every detail meticulously manicured. Elias made sure to schedule it on a weekend when he knew Madeline's family would be out of town, attending a distant relative's funeral. He believed no one would dare interrupt his moment of triumph. In his mind, Madeline was a problem he had already solved, locked away in a drug-induced slumber. Yet, unbeknownst to Elias, Frank Gates had caught wind of the upcoming engagement. From the whispered accounts he gathered, Frank deduced the event could be the perfect setting to reveal the truth about Madeline's condition, if only he could provide undeniable proof of Elias's deception. But he needed time, and he needed access. With the help of Beatrice Delacroix's high society contacts, Frank secured an invitation under an alias. He intended to see for himself how Elias could announce new nuptials with a comatose wife still alive. Meanwhile, Madeline's strength grew as the sedation lessened. Dr. Hayes carefully tapered the medication each day, monitoring Madeline's progress in secret. She left subtle cues, positive mantras on the bedside table. Gentle encouragement whispered into Madeline's ear. Slowly, the door to Madeline's consciousness opened. The day finally arrived when Madeline opened her eyes, fully alert, her voice a soft whisper as she asked, "Where am I?" That singular moment would change everything. Part 2. The escape, the call, and the truth. Unleashed, when Madeline first awoke, her head throbbed and her limbs felt heavy, but a fierce resolve invaded her. Dr. Hayes rushed to her side, urging her to remain calm. Realizing the sedation had been covertly reduced, Madeline's mind raced with questions. Why was she there? How long had she been unconscious? And where was Elias in all of this? The words came slowly. She gathered enough strength to whisper his name and confide fragments of her memories to the sympathetic doctor. Carefully, Dr. Hayes explained that Madeline had been maintained in a medically induced sedated state for a prolonged period. Officially, it was documented as necessary to manage a severe neurological condition. However, Madeleine, tears welling up in her eyes, insisted she had never been sick to begin with. She recounted her last memories, a heated discussion with Elias about his finances, her suspicion of his extramarital affairs, and the sense of danger that shadowed her every move. Dr. Hayes, in turn, realized the magnitude of the conspiracy. As strength returned to her limbs, Madeline's horror transformed into indignation. She demanded to speak with her family. But Dr. Hayes hesitated. Security personnel patrolled the halls, charged with ensuring no unauthorized visits or communications. They reported to the administrators, who ultimately answered to Elias. If anyone discovered Madeline was awake, her life could be in immediate danger. Dr. Hayes urged caution. She promised to find a safe way to contact Madeline's family. But for now, Madeline had to pretend she was still sedated, or at least incapacitated, until they could plan her escape. At the Sterling mansion, Elias was finalizing the entertainment schedule for his engagement party. He orchestrated every detail with the precision he applied to his deals. Sienna Bellwether sipped champagne by the pool, oblivious to the moral complications surrounding her fiancé. Their relationship, built on lavish gifts and superficial glamour, never delved into the subject of Madeline. At times, Sienna would joke about the comatose wife, as if she were an abstract inconvenience. Elias would simply clench his jaw and offer no explanation, focusing on the unstoppable future he envisioned with Sienna at his side. Javier Morales, observing from the sidelines, felt a growing unease. Guilt gnawed at him, as he suspected something was amiss in the way Elias talked about Madeline's condition. Yet the fear of losing his job, and possibly his own safety, kept him silent. One night, while reviewing supply lists for the engagement party, Javier stumbled upon encrypted medical invoices addressed to the private clinic. The sums were astronomical. Torn between loyalty and conscience, Javier wrote a carefully worded inquiry to the clinic's accounting department, hoping for clarity. Little did he know the reply would unleash a crisis of conscience. Back at the facility, Dr. Hayes discreetly introduced a cell phone, slipping it under Madeline's pillow. "If there is an emergency," she whispered, "call your mother and let her know you are alive." Madeline, though frail, gripped the phone like a lifeline. She knew time was short, and every moment counted. The night before Elias's engagement party, Madeline decided she could no longer remain hidden behind Dr. Hayes's veil of secrecy. Though physically weak, the knowledge of Elias's betrayal filled her with adrenaline. Clinging to the secret phone, she dialed her mother's number, her heart pounding with every ring. When Beatrice Delacroix answered, Madeline's voice cracked as she uttered one simple, momentous phrase. "Mom, I'm alive." Tears erupted on both ends of the line, mingling relief and fury in equal measure. Beatrice wasted no time contacting Frank Gates, who had been tirelessly tracking Elias's activities. Elated by the news of Madeline's awakening, Frank worked quickly to organize safe passage out of the clinic. The timing was critical. The engagement party was due to happen in a matter of hours, and Elias's security detail would likely be on high alert. Frank coordinated with Dr. Hayes, devising a plan that involved a simulated medical emergency, a distraction in the main lobby, and a private ambulance parked at the rear exit. Meanwhile, Javier Morales received the financial records he had requested. They confirmed his darkest suspicions. Exorbitant charges for potent sedatives, unauthorized medical procedures, and payoff payments to several staff members. Sleepless and restless, Javier wrestled with the idea of confronting Elias, but fear paralyzed him. Instead, he gathered the documents and resolved to contact Madeline's family when he could do so safely. On a whim, he searched for Beatrice Delacroix's phone number online, only to discover she had vanished from the radar. A sense of impending doom loomed. At the Sterling estate, a flurry of final preparations occupied every staff member. Caterers delivered gourmet dishes, florists arranged rare orchids, and a live string quartet rehearsed by the marble fountain. Sienna Bellwether reveled in the attention, imagining the headlines that would follow. Supermodel engaged to millionaire tycoon. Meanwhile, Elias surveyed the scene from his study window, sipping a premium scotch. The day he had meticulously planned had finally arrived, a day he believed would cement his authority and his public image as an enviable power couple. Little did he know that behind the wrought iron gates, an unmarked sedan drove up the winding driveway. Inside, seated, were Madeleine, Beatrice, and Frank, their hearts beating in unison. The plan was simple, yet high risk. They would make a direct entrance during Elias's speech, ensuring maximum exposure. Javier Morales, who had finally connected with Frank, would be waiting inside to document the confrontation. The evidence, medical records, bank statements, sedation orders, would be revealed to the prominent guests and the media. Madeleine felt her stomach churn with anxiety, but her resolve was unbroken. She stepped out of the car, looking frail, but determined. The woman Elias had declared comatose was ready to shatter his carefully crafted illusions. Gripping her mother's hand, Madeleine took a deep breath. The moment had arrived. If Elias thought she had no fight left in her, he was about to be proven disastrously wrong. Part 3. The conflict, the testimony, and the dawn's aurora. Under the cloak of artificial chaos, Madeleine and Dr. Hayes made their way through the dimly lit corridors, their hearts pounding at every passing silhouette. They dodged security guards who barked orders at each other, frantically trying to restore the power grid. Doors slammed open and shut, casting erratic beams of emergency light across the tiled floors. Madeleine clung to the phone in one hand and Dr. Hayes' arm in the other as they made their way toward a restricted exit, known only to a few staff members. Outside, Frank Gates waited behind the wheel of a discreet ambulance, the engine humming softly. His contact inside the facility had given him authorization to park there, under the guise of transporting an ailing patient. When Madeleine emerged, pale and wide-eyed with a mixture of dread and relief, Frank rushed to help her inside. Dr. Hayes handed Madeleine a folder containing medical evidence. "This is everything you will need to prove what he did to you," she said. "Go, expose him." As the ambulance sped away, Madeleine collapsed onto the gurney, tears streaming down her face. She was free, but the ordeal was far from over. Frank Gates explained the delicate situation. Elias's engagement party was the next day, and it presented a rare opportunity for Madeleine to confront him publicly. However, attending the event meant walking into the lion's den. Elias might have powerful allies ready to discredit her story, but Madeleine's resolve only hardened. She refused to let Elias destroy her life without a fight. Back at the estate, final rehearsals for the engagement party stretched into the night. Sienna Bellwether practiced a waltz step with Elias under the glittering chandeliers of the ballroom. She laughed as Elias spun her, cameras capturing the moment for social media previews. Her mindset was purely focused on the ostentation. In a secluded corner, Javier Morales looked at his phone, anxiously checking for any sign of Madeleine's family. A growing sense of impending doom made his palms sweat, as if the mansion itself anticipated the cataclysm about to break loose. Meanwhile, Dr. Hayes remained at the clinic, fully aware that her participation in Madeleine's escape would likely be discovered by morning. She had prepared herself to face the consequences, saving every piece of evidence to reveal if Elias attempted to retaliate. She only hoped Madeleine succeeded in exposing the truth. Once the sedation scandal went public, the clinic's complicity might also be brought to light. But for now, Dr. Hayes clung to the belief that justice, however delayed, would prevail. The weight of her decisions settled heavily on her shoulders. In a safe house arranged by Frank, Madeline spent a sleepless night grappling with raw memories. The adrenaline of her escape slowly subsided, replaced by a painful clarity. She was more than a victim. She was a woman fighting for her life, her unborn child's future, and the truth Elias had tried so desperately to conceal. The morning dawned over Dallas with a golden haze, a stark contrast to the storm raging in Madeline's heart. She stood before a mirror in the safe house bathroom, delicately touching the bruises on her arms from countless IV lines. She whispered a promise to herself. Elias Sterling would never again hold her captive. Frank Gates handed her a simple black dress, respectful attire, he said, for crashing a husband who had declared her comatose engagement party. It was an irony that almost made her laugh. Beatrice Delacroix arrived soon after. Tears of relief turned to righteous anger the moment she saw her daughter awake. Their embrace lasted minutes, mother and daughter clinging to one another in a silent vow of vengeance against the man who had tried to separate them. Between sobs, Beatrice revealed the labyrinth of lies Elias had told. The falsified medical updates, the sealed visitation orders, and the secret money that kept her from seeing Madeline. She also mentioned Elias's plan to marry Sienna Bellwether in a few weeks. Driven by maternal fury, Beatrice insisted on accompanying Madeleine to the engagement party. Frank agreed that their presence could lend credibility to Madeline's claims, but he also warned of the potential danger. Elias had built an empire on manipulation. There was no telling how far he would go to protect it. Still, Madeline refused to flinch. "If I don't confront him now," she said, her voice trembling with determination, "he'll keep winning. This has to end, for both of us." At the Sterling estate, staff moved like worker bees, preparing for the Queen's arrival. Sienna Bellwether relaxed in a luxurious suite, fixing her hair and makeup for the big announcement. She delighted in the adoration, imagining the headlines that would follow. Supermodel engaged to millionaire tycoon. Meanwhile, Elias inspected the scene from his study window, sipping a premium scotch. The day he had meticulously planned had finally arrived, a day he believed would cement his authority and his public image as an enviable power couple. Little did he know that behind the wrought iron gates, an unmarked sedan drove up the winding driveway. Inside, seated, were Madeline, Beatrice, and Frank, their hearts beating in unison. The plan was simple, yet high risk. They would make a direct entrance during Elias's speech, ensuring maximum exposure. Javier Morales, who had finally connected with Frank, would be waiting inside to document the confrontation. The evidence, medical files, bank statements, sedation orders, would be revealed to the prominent guests and the media. Madeline felt her stomach churn with anxiety, but her resolve was unshakable. She stepped out of the car, looking frail, but determined. The woman Elias had declared comatose was ready to shatter his carefully crafted illusions. Gripping her mother's hand, Madeline took a deep breath. The moment had arrived. If Elias thought she had no strength left to fight, he was about to be proven disastrously wrong. Floral arches adorned the driveway at the Sterling estate, leading to a grand courtyard filled with luxury cars. Guests, dressed in designer attire, mingled, sipping champagne and discussing gossip in hushed tones. A silence descended as Madeline, flanked by Beatrice and Frank, walked through the main doors. Heads turned, eyebrows rose in confusion. At first, some guests failed to recognize her. She was thinner, paler, and her hair was cut very short. Yet there was an unmistakable determination in her eyes that demanded attention. As they advanced toward the ballroom, staff members froze. A security guard attempted to block their way, murmuring something about a private event. Frank quickly flashed a legal document, threatening immediate action if Elias Sterling or his employees attempted to detain Madeline. Word traveled fast. By the time they reached the ballroom doors, Sienna Bellwether was standing in the center of the marble floor, wearing a shimmering gown. She looked at Madeline as if seeing a ghost. The string quartet faltered, their melody dying in a swirl of confusion. Elias stepped forward, whiskey glass still in hand, his eyes wide with pure disbelief. A mixture of shock, rage, and dread flickered across his face. He froze, then quickly recovered, showing a facade of concern. "Madeline," he called out, his voice almost paternal. "Are you awake? My God, why didn't anyone tell me?" The room erupted in whispers. Madeline stared him down, silently condemning his performance. Inside, she felt a boiling fury, but she forced herself to remain composed. She couldn't allow him to twist the narrative again. Beatrice Delacroix stepped forward, her voice trembling yet resolute. "This charade ends now. You told us our daughter was in a permanent coma, Elias. You barred us from seeing her. We have the proof of what you have done." She gestured to Frank, who pulled out documents detailing the sedation regimen, falsified medical reports, and bank transfers to clinic staff. Gasps swept through the assembled crowd as the truth began to unfold before their eyes. Sienna Bellwether looked at Elias, clearly startled by the revelation. Elias attempted to salvage the situation. He reached out to grab Madeline's hand, but she flinched away. "Please, everyone, calm down. Madeline has been sick, and I did everything I could to help her. If she has recovered, that is wonderful news." The crowd shifted uncomfortably, uncertain whether to believe this feigned concern. Madeline felt tears welling up, but held her voice firm. "You drugged me to keep me out of the way, Elias. You had me locked away while you lived your life consequences-free." Suddenly, Javier Morales stepped out from behind the press contingent, holding up his phone. "I have records, Elias. You instructed the clinic to keep Madeline sedated against her will." He hesitated, momentarily looking at his boss, but the truth proved heavier than fear. "I can't cover for you anymore," Javier said, his voice trembling. Chaos erupted. Cameras flashed as reporters scrambled for statements. Silence was replaced by a cacophony of questions. Sienna Bellwether backed away, her face paling, as if the floor beneath her feet had vanished. She had never liked dwelling on the details of Elias's personal life, but this went beyond anything she had imagined. Elias's face contorted in panic, scanning the room for a lifeline. His eyes landed on an influential senator among the crowd, but the senator simply shook his head, refusing to intervene. Madeline, fighting back tears, recounted her version of the story for the whole ballroom to hear. Her sudden collapse after an argument, waking up in a hospital bed with no recollection of consenting to the sedation, the fleeting moments of lucidity when Dr. Hayes helped her recall her life. She pointed a trembling finger at Elias. "You stole my voice, my freedom. You told the world I was in a coma so you could control my inheritance and continue your affairs, but I will not be a victim anymore." Struggling to maintain composure, Elias launched a final desperate effort of denial. "This is all a lie," he spat, his voice echoing through the marble hall. "Madeline was severely ill. Doctors recommended sedation to prevent further brain damage. I spared no expense for her care." Frank Gates stepped forward, brandishing the documents and an audio recording from the facility. The tape came alive, revealing Elias's directives to keep Madeline unconscious. Gasps escalated to cries of outrage, and reporters elbowed their way in to capture every second. Then came another bombshell. Madeline, hand trembling, announced, "I am pregnant." The confession reverberated through the room, leaving Elias momentarily paralyzed. A hush descended as the weight of her words sank in. She explained she had discovered her pregnancy during her captivity, confirming it only in the final tests Dr. Hayes performed before her escape. The child, presumably Elias's, was now at the center of an even larger moral and legal battle. His betrayal was not just against Madeleine. He had endangered the well-being of his unborn child. Beatrice supported Madeleine, a fierce protective instinct lighting her eyes. You put your own heir's life at risk for your ambitions. You wanted to marry another while your wife, carrying your child, lay in a hospital bed you paid to keep her chained in. Sienna Bellwether looked at Elias, fury and repulsion fighting for control of her features. "Is this true?" she asked. Elias stammered, reaching for a denial, but none came. The well-crafted facade he had built for years began to crumble piece by piece. With nowhere left to hide, Elias erupted in a desperate fit of rage. Part 4. The Arrest and the New Aurora. "You can't do this to me!" Elias shouted, attempting to grab Madeleine's arm. But Javier Morales and Frank Gates intervened, preventing him from harming her again. The crowd, now completely turned against Elias, watched in horror and fascination. The hour of the final reckoning had arrived. Immediately following the shocking confrontation, some guests rushed to leave, not wanting to be implicated in Elias's scandal. Others stayed, like vultures, eager to get sensational quotes and footage to fuel the media frenzy. The police, alerted by Frank Gates, arrived at the estate within minutes. Officers pushed their way through the crowd, warning everyone to remain calm. The lead detective approached Madeleine gently, asking if she needed medical attention. She shook her head, looking resolutely at Elias, who stood slumped, shoulders drooping, eyes wide with terror. The detective asked for an explanation, but Elias sputtered half-truths, blaming incompetent doctors and unscrupulous accountants. When Javier Morales stepped forward, presenting the financial records and email chains linking Elias to the sedation plot, the detective's expression darkened. This was more than a domestic dispute. It was a case of fraud, illegal confinement, and possibly attempted battery, given the potential harm to both Madeleine and her unborn child. Elias attempted to protest, but the detective silenced him, reading him his Miranda rights as cameras captured the moment. Out of the corner of her eye, Madeleine saw Sienna Bellwether discreetly sneak away. The model's face was pale, her dreams of marrying a millionaire shattered by the harsh reality that her prince was a villain. Madeleine felt a pang of pity. Sienna had been another pawn, though one with more freedom. Now, like everyone else, she had to face the consequences of Elias's collapsing empire. Madeleine focused back on the detective, handing him Dr. Hayes's folder of medical evidence, which sealed Elias's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. As officers led Elias away in handcuffs, the crowd parted like waves. For a moment, he locked eyes with Madeleine, a hurricane of emotions flickering across his face. Anger, regret, fear, a fleeting remorse, perhaps? She couldn't be sure. Cameras followed his every step, ensuring the sterling name would fill headlines for weeks. The business genius, once lauded, now looked small and pathetic, exposed before the world for his unspeakable crimes against the woman he had vowed to love and protect. Madeleine exhaled shakily, her entire body trembling from the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. Beatrice embraced her daughter, offering silent comfort. Guests slowly departed, murmuring their astonishment at the scandal. Some approached Madeleine to offer tentative support, but she could barely process their words. All she wanted was to leave that cursed mansion and begin to rebuild her life. The gravity of her situation persisted. Legal battles, divorce proceedings, and the challenge of rebuilding her emotional strength. Yet as the morning dawned, Madeline felt a sense of liberation. She had found her voice, exposed her tormentor, and broken the chains that once held her silent. She touched her abdomen softly, determined to offer her child a life free of secrets and lies. Whatever struggles lay ahead, she would face them with an unbroken spirit. Part 5. The Legacy of Aurora. Within days of Elias's arrest, the media storm reached its peak. Headlines screamed betrayal, kidnapping, and hidden wealth. Tabloids printed lurid theories, while serious newspapers condemned Elias's actions with moral outrage. Madeline became the reluctant face of a national scandal, grappling with endless interview requests. Though Frank and Beatrice shielded her from the worst of it, she understood that sharing her story would help ensure Elias faced justice. Still, every public appearance emotionally drained her, forcing her to relive the trauma she so desperately tried to leave behind. The legal proceedings began swiftly. Prosecutors built a formidable case against Elias, fueled by undeniable evidence: recorded conversations, bank transactions, medical records, and Dr. Hayes' testimony. Elias's expensive legal team tried every trick in the book, claiming Madeline's sedation was a misunderstanding, accusing the clinic of negligence, and even questioning Madeline's mental stability. But every tactic crumbled under the weight of the facts and corroborating witnesses. Dr. Hayes' composure and professionalism in court sharply contrasted with Elias's desperate attempts at damage control. Meanwhile, Madeline's focus turned inward, toward healing. She settled into a modest, sunny townhome Beatrice helped her find, with enough room for a nursery. Daily visits to a therapist became part of her routine, helping her navigate the trauma of the forced sedation and captivity. Beatrice offered unconditional support, pampering her pregnant daughter and setting up a small nursery corner. The awareness that she was bringing a new life into the world gave Madeline fragile hope. It also underscored the importance of ensuring Elias had no legal claim to the child's custody or well-being. In a stunning turn, the clinic's administration cooperated with prosecutors, providing internal documents implicating Elias in a bribery scheme. Several staff members testified that they felt coerced or threatened by Elias's associates. The more layers were uncovered, the clearer it became that Elias had orchestrated an extensive plot to secure Madeline's trust fund. His empire, once revered for its success story, seemed rotten to the core. Sterling Corp's stock plummeted, business partners fled, and old allies distanced themselves from the disgraced tycoon. Javier Morales, racked with guilt over his complicity, resigned from Sterling Corp and became a key witness for the prosecution. Though Madeline found it difficult to fully forgive him, she recognized his courage in stepping forward. His testimony was crucial in painting a detailed picture of Elias's manipulations. "I was blind," Javier admitted tearfully on the stand, "but I cannot allow him to harm her further." The sincerity in his words earned him a measure of redemption, though not without lingering regret. Late at night, alone in her small apartment, Madeline often looked at the sonogram taped to her fridge, praying for clarity in the chaos. Every heartbeat of the tiny life growing inside her reminded her of her own strength. She had escaped a living nightmare, exposed her tormentor, and was carving a path toward a future that, though uncertain, was finally hers to shape. As the trial date approached, public sentiment swung firmly to Madeline's side. Women's advocacy groups rallied behind her, condemning Elias's actions as a grievous violation of personal autonomy and spousal trust. Overnight, Madeline found herself, unintentionally, transformed into a symbol of resilience. Reporters clamored for exclusive interviews, but she maintained a careful distance, issuing statements only occasionally through Frank Gates. Each court hearing brought new revelations of Elias's deception, further cementing the case against him. Elias, out on bail but under strict conditions, retreated to a guarded penthouse in the city. His smooth bravado had crumbled into a sullen resentment. He refused to attend many of the preliminary hearings in person, citing stress and alleged threats to his safety. Rumor had it he desperately tried to negotiate a settlement with Madeline, offering vast sums to have the charges dropped. But Madeline's sole demand was his accountability. No amount of money could erase the nightmare she had endured. The day of the trial, the courthouse overflowed with spectators. Media vans lined the street, transmitting every development. Madeline arrived with Beatrice by her side, her pregnancy visibly advanced. She walked past the throng of reporters, her head held high. Once inside, she met Elias's gaze, seated with his legal team. He looked haggard, his face etched with worry. The jury, composed of diverse individuals, listened intently as the prosecutor laid out the horrifying details of the forced sedation and financial subterfuge. Dr. Hayes's testimony proved pivotal. With professionalism and empathy, she recounted her suspicion that Madeline was being unnecessarily sedated, her gradual decision to taper the medication, and ultimately, her aid in Madeline's escape. Evidence of falsified medical charts and inflated sedation orders underscored her words. Elias's attorney attempted to discredit her, suggesting she violated hospital protocols, but her meticulous documentation and moral convictions shone through. The jury nodded grimly, clearly appalled by the cruelty inflicted upon Madeline. Next came Javier Morales, his voice trembling with nerves. He recounted the nights he spent altering financial documents at Elias's behest, the hush money payments, and the coded emails that kept Madeleine's true condition hidden from the Board of Trustees. Tears glistened in his eyes as he admitted the fear of losing his job had initially kept him silent. The defense attempted to paint Javier as a disgruntled employee, but the sincerity of his confession resonated far louder than the attorney's feeble attacks. Finally, Madeline took the stand. She spoke in a clear, steady voice, recounting the early days of her marriage, the moment she suspected Elias valued her inheritance more than her love, and the terror of waking up to find herself trapped. She detailed the claustrophobic feeling of the sedation, the semi-conscious dreams, and the sheer horror of realizing her husband was behind it all. In a dramatic twist, Sienna Bellwether appeared in court. Though not legally obligated to testify, her publicist advised it might salvage her tarnished reputation. Dressed conservatively, she recounted her ignorance of Elias's marital complications. She claimed she had been led to believe Madeline's condition was terminal, and recalled nights when Elias flinched at the mention of his wife, warning Sienna never to bring her up in public. Though not fully absolved of moral responsibility, Sienna's testimony further confirmed Elias's manipulative nature. Over the next few days, an astonishing volume of incriminating documents was presented to the court. Forensic accountants tracked Elias's funneling of Madeline's trust funds into his failing business ventures. Emails proved he had orchestrated every detail of her sedation, ensuring she could not exercise her legal rights or challenge his actions. With every revelation, Elias's defense crumbled further. The once formidable millionaire looked gaunt, repeatedly glancing at the jury as if searching for sympathy he knew he would not find. As closing arguments neared, Madeline felt a paradoxical mix of dread and relief. She wanted closure, yet confronting Elias in that courtroom reopened wounds she had tried so hard to heal. On the penultimate day of the trial, her doctor expressed concern over the stress on her pregnancy, warning her to rest as much as possible. But Madeline refused to withdraw until the verdict was delivered. "I need to see this through," she insisted, her hand resting protectively on her abdomen. The prosecutor's final argument was scathing, calling Elias's actions the epitome of greed and callousness. Treating one's own spouse as a pawn, stripping a pregnant woman of her autonomy, this is more than a financial crime. It is a crime against basic human decency, the prosecutor declared. Elias's lead attorney offered a half-hearted plea for understanding, citing Elias's stressful upbringing and business pressures. The contrast was stark, and the jury's expressions reflected little sympathy for the fallen tycoon. After deliberating for only a few hours, the jury returned with a unanimous verdict. Guilty on multiple counts, including fraud, illegal confinement, and assault. Elias stood rigid as the judge read the verdict, sentencing him to a substantial prison term. Gasps and murmurs filled the courtroom. For a moment, Madeline's heart hammered so loud she couldn't hear anything else, then relief washed over her like a wave. The man who had stolen her freedom would no longer control her future or her child's. As Elias was led away, he cast one last glance toward Madeline, his eyes filled with a storm of regret and rage. She held his gaze, unblinking, until he disappeared behind the courtroom doors. In that fleeting moment, all the pain, betrayal, and anguish found a glimmer of justice. Madeline exhaled, tears of relief tracing paths down her face. Life after the trial was far from a simple, happily ever after, but it was a beginning. Madeline moved into a sunny townhome Beatrice helped her find, with enough space for a nursery. She continued therapy, processing the trauma of the forced sedation and betrayal. Media attention subsided, but never entirely faded. Still, she learned to navigate interviews with cautious grace. Occasionally, she received letters from well-wishers who admired her courage. Those messages reminded her that sharing her story might help others, trapped in abusive circumstances. Financially, Madeline faced the overwhelming task of untangling her assets from Elias's shattered company. The trust fund, though still intact, had become entangled in lawsuits from creditors seeking any angle to recover from Sterling Corp's collapse. With Frank Gates's guidance, she secured her rights, gradually restoring what had been stolen from her. The process was slow, hampered by bureaucracy, but it symbolized a reclaiming of her identity. Every legal victory felt like a small triumph against the shadow of Elias's control. News of Elias's conviction reverberated in high society circles, toppling his previously praised reputation. Business partners who had lauded him for his investment acumen now distanced themselves, denying any knowledge of his criminal acts. His name became synonymous with betrayal. Meanwhile, Sienna Bellwether quietly slipped away from the public eye, booking fewer modeling jobs as the scandal followed her. Rumor had it she moved to Europe, starting fresh with a different agency. But Madeline found she held no ill will toward the model. Her fury was reserved solely for Elias. 7 months after the trial, Madeline went into labor. In a bright hospital room far removed from the shadows of her past, she clung to Beatrice's hand as doctors and nurses worked diligently. The pain was intense, but through gritted teeth, she reminded herself this was a different struggle, one that heralded hope, not despair. Hours later, she welcomed a healthy baby girl into the world. Tears of joy mingled with relief as she held her daughter, marveling at the precious life she had protected against all odds. Naming her daughter Aurora, meaning dawn, Madeline vowed to give her child a life free from the darkness Elias had cast. Beatrice stood nearby, beaming with grandmotherly pride. Though the road ahead was still dotted with challenges, media inquiries, lingering legalities, and emotional scars, Madeline felt a surge of invincible love within her. Here, in this fragile new life, resided her true victory. the chance to build a future defined by resilience, honesty, and love. Aurora was the promise that even the deepest night must yield to the light of day. A story like this reminds us that the human spirit can prevail against the most calculated cruelty. Madeline refused to be defined by despair and found her way to freedom. By exposing Elias's lies, she not only saved herself and her unborn child, but inspired others to speak out against abuse. Every step of her journey was marked by courage, from the moment she opened her eyes in that clinic to the day she cradled Aurora in her arms. Now, strong on her own terms, Madeline has embraced a new beginning, liberated from those who sought to silence her. Conclusion and final call to action. If this powerful story resonated with you, show your support by hitting that like button, sharing the video to spread awareness, and subscribing to our channel for more compelling stories of resilience. Your participation helps keep these important stories alive. Join us in this journey to expose injustice and celebrate the triumph of the human spirit.